I think it's a really important thing that we have a chance on the back end of failure to then put prayer goals and vision goals out there, for the next iteration of it. Like, we're always looking forward. We're always looking up. Man, there's always a new kind of morning, coming, and the sun's going to come up, and we get a chance to really show that to our folks,
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
All right. Hey, guys. Welcome back to the Breaking Barriers podcast. My name is Pastor Andrew Hopper, and I'm here today with Pastor Bobby Harrington. Man, we're really excited to be diving into a topic, but we're only excited because we feel like this is really necessary. Today is one of those topics that, honestly, for me, is not all that fun to talk about, because today we're going to talk about what God can teach us in and how to handle failure. Honestly, like when we have big goals and we don't meet those goals, I think there are a few very common pitfalls and things that we can end up kind of falling back to, reverting to. And we want to try to watch out for those things. In failure, we still want to move forward. We want to fail forward, or people call it fall forward. We want to continue to grow, even though maybe we didn't hit the goal that we had. And that can happen, right? Like, we can become stronger, more robust, I would say even more faith-filled leaders sometimes when we experience failure. But the other thing can be true too, man. We can revert, we can get smaller. Our faith can become, less something we don't want to put out there as much. I mean, a lot of negative things can happen too. So we want to try to fall forward. Bobby, I know that you are. Well, you said you had. You said you had content for days on this because of how many failures you've had in your life.
Close acquaintance.
Yeah, close acquaintance. Yeah, but I know from you, man, personally, and I know from your personal encouragement to me that you are a big believer in, we can get a lot stronger through failure sometimes, even than through victories or whatever. So what are your thoughts on this, just kind of initially, when we even bring up the whole topic of failing, but doing it in a way where we grow and build rather than taking a bunch of steps back and shrinking in fear?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic to discuss and hopefully be kind of vulnerable, because I think if you are the type of leader that has any big dreams for your church or any big dreams for your life, then you certainly are going to be confronted with failure pretty quickly, probably.
Right.
And, there's so many different ways to respond to failure, and you can kind of become a victim of your circumstances. Mm-hmm. You can use it to grow. There's so many practical things that we could discuss around failure. I really believe we can get into this more here in a bit, but failure is probably a much greater teacher than success is. Mm. And, also how we frame what's happening in our life kind of practically and even spiritually, it makes a real big difference, I think, to like how we respond and how we learn and how we grow. Because, if God's will for us is our sanctification, what we sometimes can define as failure maybe is not failure at all. It's God's opportunity to use that to grow us, or it's even, man, through this failure, there is actually a bigger success,
right,
in the future. And any leader that goes after any big goal is going to be very acquainted with failure. So I think it's a great topic.
Yeah, and I think most mature believers, when you ask them, what are the times that they felt that God was the closest to them in their life, or that they saw the church really rally for them in in a way that was unexpected, or they felt very close to God's people and his mission. A lot of times it is not the top of the mountain. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's when you feel like you can't even see the sun and you're in the middle of the valley. Now, none of us want to go through that. And I never want to fail again the rest of my life. I would love to just win, just win every day, all day. But at the same time, we do know that God can do a lot through those failures, and he could teach us a lot through it. One of the things that I want to do is try to give about two sets of threes, okay? Mm-hmm. 3 frameworks on what are common mistakes that people make when they fail. So I'm not talking about like the practical things that cause you to fail, but like your response to it.
Right.
Okay. And then 3 positive things that we can do when we fail. to grow and to be stronger from it and to knock it out of the park the next time. The first one I would say, in terms of the way that we can end up really having, compounding failures, we can end up responding the wrong way when we don't hit a goal, is we end up taking on, you mentioned this, so maybe you can expound on it. We end up taking on a victim mentality, meaning we refuse to look introspectively to see, man, what could we have done differently? How could we have been different and bring a different set of circumstances to the situation, rather than, what many of us want to do is, the second we know we're not going to hit whatever goal it was, we are looking for all the reasons that we can kind of make excuses so that it doesn't end up being our fault. And I think it's a real disservice when that happens, because it's only in understanding that maybe we are deficient in some areas, or we didn't do something right, that we can grow. So if we refuse to even look introspectively, we're going to miss out on the opportunity. If you're constantly a victim, then we're not even going to have the opportunity to figure out what things we could change to grow. So how have you seen that play out, or what do you think about that? You're just kind of pointing the finger at everybody else. Man, it was something else, and it was not my fault.
Yeah, I think one distinction that I would maybe make in my mind is, I think there's kind of a difference in being a victim and like a victim mentality, because like someone may truly be a victim of something, right? Like you didn't control it. Somebody meant you harm. Somebody tried to hurt you. Something happened at the church that was outside of your control, something where it's like you literally didn't have control. And it's like, okay, that may actually be true, right? I mean, bad things happen to us. We live in a sinful, broken world. That is different than having a victim mentality, And a victim mentality, I think, is I'm going to throw my hands up and there's nothing I can do about this because I am a victim. There's nothing that I control about this. There's no steps to be taken. There's nothing to be learned. And it's like, you just kind of throw your hands up. And it's like, that victim mentality is, I think, always going to be harmful, like no matter what, because I mean, we know from the Bible, like Romans 8:28, like God can use anything to grow us. And so just throwing our hands up and saying we can never learn from something, or man, there's nothing to be done because I wasn't in control of this situation. I just think it's always going to set us up for more failure, kind of like a spiral of, like I was recently listening to Cam Haynes, the famous bow hunter. He's got a book called Endure, and I've only listened to part of it, but he just talks about like his childhood being so difficult, like his dad and stepdad were alcoholics, and he's just going through all the different things that would cause people to kind of become a victim, and his famous line is, nobody cares, work harder. Like man, right. Like he was
classic boomer line right there.
Like, he's just like, man, I didn't have control in any of these things, but he's like, but that to just kind of wallow in that is always going to lead to worse stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, what can you learn? Maybe another way to say it is like, when you take on the victim mentality, you're cutting yourself off from being able to grow or learn from the situation.
Totally. I mean, I've seen people that when you ask them why their life has turned out the way it has, they immediately say, man, my father wasn't around. I grew up in poverty. This neighborhood was bad. And then you see other people that, I'm thinking of like Anthony Richardson, quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, played at Florida. It's like they asked him, how have you gotten to where you are? And it's like, well, my dad wasn't around. I mean, right, my dad wasn't, the exact same thing. It's like my dad wasn't around. Grew up in a bad neighborhood. It was, and I'm probably even getting the details of that wrong. But the point is, you've seen that where one person has that victim mentality of, look what's happened to me. And another person says, man, no matter what has happened to me, I still have the agency in my life and the responsibility to move forward with whatever the situation is. Like, I'm going to move forward. You see this a lot of times with guys who are like really great dads. It's like, man, why are you an awesome dad? Some people are like, man, I'm an awesome dad because I had an awesome dad. And other guys are like, man, I had an awesome dad because I want to be the dad that I never had, And so it's really just the mentality. And so trying very hard in the midst of failure not to immediately jump to, well, I couldn't control any of this. We try to very much have like an extreme ownership culture. I understand that there are headwinds in life. I mean, we talk about this during COVID, right? It's like we really truly believe it did not matter what decisions we were making in some things. It just, the cultural headwind was against growing churches at that time. It was just very hard. But at the same time, if you have a mentality of, I'm going to keep making decisions, we're going to keep trying to do the next right thing, you end up coming out of that stuff and bouncing back from it rather than sitting in kind of wallowing. I think another thing that people do that's wrong in the midst of failure, you've set a big goal, is what you say is, man, I shrink back and I'm never going to do that again. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do that again. I don't want to be one who is, I don't want to be embarrassed like that. I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to lose leadership credibility by setting a goal and not hitting it. And so I'm just going to shrink back and we're going to start really paring down the vision, and we're not going to throw anything out there that could be big anymore just in case we don't hit it.
Man, yeah, 100%. And I think there's spiritual kind of theology behind this, and there's a ton of even just like practical examples. I mean, I think about any great, just like inventor, entrepreneur, war fighter. Anything you could possibly think of. People that oftentimes accomplish a lot of success, it's through a lot of failure.
Right.
And a lot of times, it's like, man, how much they're able to actually like learn, from that failure. And I really do believe like failure is probably a lot better teacher than success, even though we don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
And I think like, I don't know what word you want to use, but especially for pastoral ministry, like tenacity in the face of failure is, I think, going to probably be the biggest determiner of success in the future. Mm-hmm. But I think what we do in our culture, and a lot of this comes down to like some, I think, not very good, like will of God theology. A lot of times we think, man, we in church, we go after this big thing, doesn't work out like we expect it to, and then our next thing that we say is, oh, well, we must be outside of the will of God, because the will of God wouldn't equate to this failure.
We didn't hear him right. We didn't get our decoder ring out the right way.
Right. But when you think about like the Apostle Paul's ministry, it's like you go read through some of the stuff he recounts and you're like, man, it in some ways it feels like nothing but just failure after failure after failure. Getting beaten, shipwrecked, getting dragged out of the city, and it's like,
right.
If you framed it like, man, this thing went bad, we didn't accomplish it, therefore I'm outside of the will of God. I just think but most people think that way, honestly.
It's very easy for us to get our hand burned and not want to put your hand back up there. I think there is a lot of theology stuff that's wrapped up in that where we don't understand, hey, this was never about me. It was never about, it's not my church. It's God's church. But we do kind of shrink back, and we can end up having a lot smaller dreams. I think that there's a lot of buzz around this word right now, and we think about the book Leadership Pain and different books that have come out, but it truly is like leadership is resilience. It just truly is. Like if people are only going to be able to rise to the level of which they can rally through the next failure. Because if the failure sort of makes them, if they're like, man, I can't rise to that again, they will inevitably begin to shoot way lower in terms of goals and all that.
That's true.
The third thing I was going to say is, and I'm actually going to just say this one and then move on. I want to make sure we have time for these, because really the meat of this is in the three things I think we can learn from failure and in a positive way. But man, I just think sometimes with the wrong theology, you mentioned on this, that not hitting goals can just shrink our faith, man, that we can end up actually believing that maybe God does not want to do some of the things that we thought he wanted to do, or that he could do the things that we are asking him to do. So man, that's another one that we just end up with a smaller faith. And again, we can see how detrimental that would be. But hey, I want to turn this now with the rest of our time, and this is really the meat that we wanted to get into, is let's talk about three things that are very positive that come out of failure. And let me just go ahead and start with a little bit of a story here that we have going on. We could recount different things. As you said, we are, what'd you say? Highly acquainted.
Acquainted with many failures. Yeah.
We are acquainted with many failures. So, but one that we've been working toward is, we've been trying very hard to get into a new facility. For example, we've been our broadcast campus is by God's grace going to move. We thought that move would happen, in the Easter season of 2024. Then that turned into summer of 2024. That turned into fall of 2024, which turned into Christmas of 2024, which now has turned into sometime in 2025, right? And so for us, we were really hopeful for Easter. We thought it would be unfathomable not to be in the new facility for our Kids Week, which then turned into the fall launch. How in the world could we miss that? Which then turned into, well, of course we're going to be in by Christmas, which has now turned into, no, we're not. And I just thought about that because it's very hard. Like a couple weeks ago, I was going to announce to the church that we were not going to be meeting in there and, the new space for Christmas. And in our world, we know what that means. Christmas is a huge day. Probably could have seen multiple, maybe even in the thousands of first-time guests with the new facility launching, and it's not going to happen. And I tried very hard to say to our staff, this is a colossal failure. There's no other way to spin it. We had it on a vision board that we wanted to move the regional campus before the year of 2024 is over, and we have not. Miss it by a week or miss it by a year. We've missed it, And so, trying to say that, don't sugarcoat it, like it is what it is. We failed. All right, now, from there, once we've kind of been able to admit that, what can God do with it? And I've got three things here. I want you to speak to these, but three things here that I feel like immediately come to my mind where God can move in incredible ways in our life right on the backs of saying we failed. We did not hit the goal. And the first one is, it is really, in my opinion, it is only in the midst of struggle and failure that you can declare things like whatever, success, church growth, you can put it in any other kind of thing that we want to put idols, that you can say those things are not my well for living water. It is very hard to say in sincerity that success, we could say, hey, success is not living water, but when you're living in the midst of success after success after success, it's hard to know if you really mean that or not, right? But in the midst of failure, you have an opportunity to honestly, before God and others, say, man, what is that thing that I'm going after for living water? Thinking of John 4 here. And is it success in ministry, or is it this new building or growth or whatever? Or God, is the abundant life my relationship with you? Mm-hmm. And it's really it's only when you fail that you get a chance to actually say that and put your hands up before God, I think, and mean it.
Yeah, I think it's probably why the Bible talks about how difficult it is to be wealthy or to be rich, and also be able to get to heaven or have a relationship with God, because especially in our environment where it's like a lot of the things that you put your hand to the plow, and most of the time we are successful, and it's kind of like for Mercy Hill, we've seen a lot of success and a lot of success in our lives personally and all that stuff. And so you can say whatever you want to, and you can genuinely be in a good place with God and have success. But like you said, having something stripped away or something not going as you hoped,
right.
Because reality is as a believer, our greatest thing that we have is our relationship with God. And that's the thing that's unchanging. And even all the blessings in our life, our kids, marriages, wealth, being a pastor, whatever, it's man, those things are somewhat changing,
Right.
And so it does reveal. Now, it's not a reason to say we're never going to have goals or whatever, but it really does reveal our relationship with God and what we actually are relying on.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, the blessings of God versus God himself. I shared this story in a sermon recently, but, I think about in my life with my boys, we love to do all the outdoor stuff. We just love it. It's man, we love they have guns and four-wheeler and, dogs and machetes and the whole thing. It was so funny yesterday, or not yesterday, but the other day I was, we had a tower heater that, like a space heater, tower heater that just 10 years in and it just gave out, or 15 years in, it just gave out. It was just I just had it sitting over in the corner, and my 9-year-old was Dad, what is that? I was like, man, it's a tower heater. I said, it doesn't work anymore. The next thought out of his mine came out of his mouth as a verbalized thought. He said, can I shoot it with my shotgun? I'm like, yeah, bud. As long as I can watch, I wanted to be a part of that. So, but I say that just to say, like, man, we do a lot of that kind of stuff. But I would hope that if you got down to the heart level with them and you said, hey, all this stuff that y'all do, that the dad has given you, the BB guns, the 4-wheelers, dogs, whatever, like I hope that they would say, like, hey, we love that stuff and it helps us connect with dad. But, if you said, hey, you can have all that, but you don't have dad, they would say, like, no, like dad is what we want.
Yeah.
And to me, it's only, and that's a good analogy for this. Like, what is the abundant life? John 10:10. What is the living water? I think sometimes when those things are taken away, that's really the only time that you have an opportunity to say, no, God, my relationship with you, being a son or a daughter of the King, that is everlasting joy for me. That truly at your right hand are pleasures forevermore, and your presence is the fullness of joy. And it's not in this success or making it to the next level or getting on Outreach Magazine or whatever the thing is that people would have in their mind. John 4, I think, is really good for this, where Jesus answered and said, if you knew the gift of God and who it is saying to you, give me a drink, you would ask him and he would give you living water. Mm-hmm. That Jesus can provide that living water in our life, void of these different successes and that kind of thing. The second thing I would say is it gives us an opportunity to sit back before our people and our staff and our leaders and whoever it is and actually actively trust the sovereignty of God. Man, if all we do is kind of like you said, throw your hands up. Like what I tell our guys, our church planners, I'm like, hey, when you come up against a goal that you miss, what you need to do is keep your head up without throwing your hands up. Mm-hmm. You keep your head up, man. It's in God's hands. It's his church. But you don't throw your hands up and act like there's nothing else you can do, or you're not going to try to do the next right thing. There's some kind of interplay with sovereignty, with God's sovereignty, I think, that happens whenever we don't hit a goal, where we're able to say, okay, at the end of the day, it's like Psalm 127. I'm hammering, but I know that you're building the house. It kind of severs that link between what we do and what the outcome is, where it sort of shows actually God is over all of this. He is the one that is working in all this. Man, he's working through our efforts, and that's great. But at the end of the day, it's really about him. And one of the places that I've gone many times in talking about this is Job 28, where the Bible says, when God fixed the weight of the wind and distributed the water by measure, when he established a limit for rain and a path for the lightning, he considered wisdom and evaluated it. He established it and examined it. He said to mankind, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn from evil, that is understanding. So I read that, and then I think of a story. Okay, the story is Mercy Hill's 5 years old. Mm-hmm. You and I have the bright idea that we're going to get the church to get really excited about throwing ourselves our own birthday party. Subsequently figured it out that nobody cares that it's your birthday. Okay. But we didn't know that then. So we do all of this stuff, invite people, blah, 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 and nobody does it. And I mean, it was probably one of the most spectacular failures that we've had in terms of we had a stated goal and we did not reach that attendance goal by very much, but it wasn't even really that close. All right. Okay. In the midst of that, this is a place where we get a chance to go and say, God, you have given weight to the wind. You have fixed the measure of water. You give a path to the lightning. If you give the wind its weight, you certainly get to control who comes to our 5-year birthday party. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean we don't try. It doesn't mean we don't learn. We've never subsequently thrown ourselves a birthday party after that, right? We didn't just throw our hands up. We owned it. Hey, in retrospect, this probably wasn't the best idea. But at the same time, it gives us a chance in the midst of that failure to say, God, ultimately, this is your church. You are the sovereign one. And it was never mine to begin with. And I can't control all the results that are going to happen here. And I just think it's a really good spiritual gut check for us.
Yeah, it makes me think of Deuteronomy 29:29, where it says the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever. Like, even in saying that it's failure, I think it's important to say, hey, according to our human-made plans, this thing failed.
Right.
Like, clearly it was never within God's secret will that we were going to be in this space by the end of the year because we prayed, we tried our hardest, it didn't work. And I think we have to realize that that's what our plans are, right? I mean, it's like, they're not Bible because it says the revealed things belong to us, which means like, man, we have God's word. That's not going to fail. That's never going to fail. You can count on it. You can say, this is God's word. And then you have the secret things that like, man, we don't know what God's always up to behind the scenes. And, you know, our human made plans are somewhere in between those, you know, it's like, it's not Bible.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's like, it's a test of our faith because it's like, yeah, there's lots of things in life that we're never going to have the answer for. We don't know why it happened. We don't know the good that's going to come out of it. And do we just trust God that, man, God's God and we're not God? And the very definition of that means we're not privy to all the plans. We're not privy to all the backstory. You know, I mean, you think of like COVID, and it's like, man, how could God want to decrease all of our church's attendance by 80% or 70% or whatever? And at the end of the day, like you just have to say, man, I don't know, God. We just trust you, and
right.
You have plans that are higher than us and beyond us, and we just got to trust your word and just kind of keep moving forward, you know?
Totally, man. So, all right, so we come up against a failure. Maybe I've already mentioned too. Maybe you don't get in the space that you thought. Maybe you don't hit the attendance that you thought. There's a lot of ways that we swing and miss. You know, I don't know. People have a lot of goals for their year and things like that, and maybe they just don't happen. What do you do? How can you fall forward in that? How do you grow from that? The first thing we said is, man, in that moment, it's an opportunity for you to say, wait a minute, hitting that goal is not living water for me. I was excited about it. I want it to happen. It's a blessing of God, but it's not the abundant life. The abundant life is a restored relationship with God where I'm living, fulfilling my purpose. And that's a good gut check for us, John 4. The second thing is we would say, man, it's an opportunity for us to remember God is sovereign in all this. Now, we don't throw our hands up. You know, we don't just say, well, he's sovereign, so I don't even work. Of course, we don't do that. But we also understand in the economy of God's kingdom, sometimes cause and effect, there's not as clear a link as we think. I mean, actually, in the world, there's not as clear a link as we think with cause and effect. But certainly when it comes to the Lord and what he's doing, I mean, we may have, you know, gave it our best shot or whatever. It didn't work out. It wasn't in his secret will, as you said. And so we've got to just remember he is on the throne. Deuteronomy 29:29 is a good place for that. Job chapter 28, verse 25 and 26 are good places for that. The last thing I would say is, and I think this is very important, as a leader. So I'm speaking, you know, I know a lot of different people are listening to this, and we even have some business people listening to this and stuff, but I'm specifically talking about lead pastors here. I think it is very important that when we don't hit a goal, that we model for our people what it looks like to honor God with declaring that he is sovereign over it. We didn't have, you know, that was, man, it is what it is, but then not take our ball and go home. I think it's a really important thing that we have a chance on the back end of failure to then put prayer goals and vision goals out there, you know, for the next iteration of it. Like, we're always looking forward. We're always looking up. Man, there's always a new kind of morning, you know, coming, and the sun's going to come up, and we get a chance to really show that to our folks. You know, if somebody goes for something that don't happen, and the next thing you know, they've turned into one of these people that feels like goals are unspiritual or something. And it's like, man, why wouldn't we just kind of put it back out there and say, hey, it's always been in God's hands, but we're still going to run as hard as we can.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but there's kind of a propensity with pastors, and sometimes I think lead pastors, to like, I don't know, you just don't want to admit, like, man, we failed, like we tried, we failed, you know, and it could feel like, man, it's going to look really bad on me, and I'm trying to make all these changes here, and if I get up and say that I failed, like, or we failed or whatever, you know, like there was failure, we didn't hit whatever thing we were trying to do, then I'm not going to have as much leadership trust in the future. And I mean, in many ways, I honestly think it's kind of the opposite, you know, like the really influential, the really powerful leader. Yeah. I mean, you don't want to get up and, you know, every single week, it's just like failed. But dude, you want to build credibility and authenticity and leadership trust with people. You talk about like, hey, we went after this, we didn't accomplish this. Man, we're going to continue to trust God, and we're going to continue to move forward and like share like, hey, we're real people. We're not just like leadership robots. Because I think you get kind of in a larger church, people can begin to see the pastors as like these leadership guru robots that are just like go after goals and accomplish these goals and not like real people. And I think, yeah, sometimes when you just talk about failure, it's just so much more real to people because the average person is constantly dealing with failure. And most people probably just end up kind of being a victim of it, and just like stop trying and man, I'm just kind of going to accept my lot in life, and yeah, I just think it's great. I think for people to see you kind of wrestling with it and not just kind of take your ball and go home.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that fear before with like monetary. We're trying to raise X amount of money by the end of the year. I know in 2023 we were kicking off our Deeper initiative, and we were really hoping that we would see maybe $1 million, maybe $2 million more come in at the end of that year than happened. And we had talked about what we thought we needed to be and all that, and it's like, I mean, I don't love that, like I would rather us hit every goal every single time and blow it out of the water. And I love standing on stage and celebrating that stuff. But having the resilience and also the trust in the Lord to come right back and say, okay, well, hey, here's the plan for this year. And I just think it's so important to model that for people. And I think it really gives people the opportunity to see that what we say we actually mean. And what I mean is, we say, hey, we get a chance to honor God on the front end by how big our goals are because it honors who he is. God is honored by big prayers. He honors big prayers. We believe that. But then we get a chance to honor God on the back end by either celebrating what he did or by saying, hey, God, it was always in your hands. And man, there's nothing I could do. There's nothing I can really do. Like you're the one that holds the cattle on 1,000 hills, and the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And it's your world. And we get a chance to honor him in either one of those, And I think the ability to then come right back and set some new goals and start getting after it is a really important thing to model for our folks. So
yeah, I would say too, is like just kind of a summary of the whole thing, like kind of bring a lot of these points together is like, I think the older I get, the more to me, it's kind of obvious, like the really mature leader is able to kind of balance all of this stuff, because you see certain leaders that are like, man, it's almost like we're not going to try, we're not going to learn, we're not going to get better because it's just all in God's hands. It's kind of an overly pious, we're just going to pray, we're going to fast. And it's like, we're never going to learn anything. We're never going to try to be a better leader. And then you have other people that like, man, they put it all on themselves, right? And you see people crash out of ministry. People see people burn out of ministry. You see people lose their faith, lose hope. And the mature leader is like balancing all of that of like, man,
right,
where we are trying our best. We're trying to be a good leader. We're trying to learn from the failure, learn from our mistakes. And we also simultaneously are trusting God and trusting that God is going to work all this stuff out, trusting God's going to grow us, going to grow our church through this, and trusting God that sometimes what we view as failure in our eyes is honestly setting the church up or setting us up for more success in the future. And to me, that's maturity, that you're able to hold all that tension up and not just kind of like dive into one ditch or the other.
Totally. Well, that's great, man. Well, let's leave it there. Hey, guys, at Breaking Barriers, there is always another event coming. So check out breakinggrowthbarriers.com. We have quarterly one-day events that are, they're just for us to equip and bring people. Normally we're bringing high-level leaders in to teach our church something, and we just try to open that up for other churches that are like-minded. And so we'd love for you to check some of those things out. All right, that's it.